Welcome, dear listeners, to my channel, Book Buddy Global by VJ Ja, to another enlightening journey through the pages of history and philosophy. I'm your narrator, VJ Ja, and today we embark on a fascinating exploration of one of history's most misunderstood yet profound thinkers, Epicurus of Samos. In this comprehensive audiobook, we'll uncover the real truth behind the man whose name has become synonymous with pleasure-seeking, but whose actual philosophy runs far deeper than mere hedonism. We'll discover how a Greek philosopher born over 2,300 years ago developed ideas about happiness, friendship, death, and the good life that remain remarkably relevant today. So settle in, make yourself comfortable, and prepare to challenge everything you thought you knew about pleasure, pain, and the pursuit of true happiness. This is Epicurus Biography, The Truth of Having Fun. Chapter 1, The Birth of a Revolutionary Mind. Our story begins in 341 BCE on the beautiful island of Samos in the Aegean Sea. It was here that Epicurus was born into a world of political turmoil and philosophical revolution. Ancient Greece was experiencing unprecedented intellectual ferment, with great thinkers like Plato and Aristotle laying the foundations of Western philosophy. Epicurus came from an Athenian family that had settled on Samos as part of Athens' colonial expansion. His father, Neocles, was a schoolteacher, and his mother, Cheristrate, was known for her involvement in religious ceremonies. This combination of education and spirituality in his household would profoundly shape young Epicurus's approach to life and learning. The island of Samos itself was a remarkable place in the ancient world. It was the birthplace of the mathematician Pythagoras, and had a rich tradition of scientific and philosophical inquiry. The island's position as a crossroads of trade and culture exposed its inhabitants to diverse ideas and ways of life. For young Epicurus, this multicultural environment would prove invaluable in developing his later philosophical outlook. During Epicurus's youth, the Greek world was dominated by the towering figure of Alexander the Great, whose conquests were spreading Greek culture across the known world. However, after Alexander's death in 323 BCE, the Greek world fragmented into competing kingdoms, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty and anxiety that would deeply influence Epicurus's philosophical development. As a young man, Epicurus witnessed the brutal realities of political upheaval firsthand. When he was just 18, Athens expelled all Athenian settlers from Samos, forcing his family to flee their home. This experience of displacement and loss would later inform his understanding of suffering and his quest for a philosophy that could provide genuine security and peace of mind. Despite these early hardships, or perhaps because of them, Epicurus displayed an early aptitude for learning and philosophical inquiry. He was particularly drawn to the works of Democritus, the ancient Ottomist philosopher who proposed that everything in the universe was composed of indivisible particles called atoms. This materialist worldview would become a cornerstone of Epicurus's own philosophical system. Chapter 2, The Making of a Philosopher. The young Epicurus's philosophical education was unlike that of many of his contemporaries. While most aspiring philosophers flocked to Athens to study at Plato's Academy or Aristotle's Lyceum, Epicurus charted his own course. His approach to learning was remarkably independent and critical from the beginning. During his early 20s, Epicurus spent time in Mytilene on the island of Lesbos, where he began teaching and developing his own philosophical ideas. However, his unconventional views quickly made him unpopular with the established philosophical community. The traditional philosophers of the time were deeply invested in complex metaphysical systems and abstract theoretical debates. Epicurus, by contrast, was developing a philosophy focused on practical wisdom and the art of living well. His time in Mytilene was marked by controversy and conflict with other philosophers. The established schools found his emphasis on pleasure as the highest good to be scandalous, and his rejection of traditional religious beliefs to be impious. These early conflicts taught Epicurus valuable lessons about the importance of surrounding oneself with like-minded individuals and creating a supportive community for philosophical inquiry. From Mytilene, Epicurus moved to Lampsacus, a city on the Hellespont, where he found a more receptive audience for his ideas. It was here that he began to attract his first serious followers, including several individuals who would become lifelong companions and collaborators in his philosophical work. Among these early disciples were Metrodorus, Hermarchus, and Polyaenus, all of whom would play crucial roles in the development and preservation of Epicurean philosophy. The community that formed around Epicurus in Lampsacus was revolutionary in several ways. Unlike other philosophical schools that were typically composed exclusively of men from wealthy families, Epicurus welcomed people from all walks of life, including women and slaves. This radical inclusiveness reflected his belief that philosophical wisdom should be available to all people, regardless of their social status or background. During his time in Lampsacus, Epicurus also began his prolific writing career. Ancient sources credit him with writing over 300 works, covering topics ranging from physics and ethics to politics and love. Unfortunately, only a small fraction of his writings have survived to the present day, primarily in the form of 3 letters preserved by the later philosopher Diogenes Laertius and some fragments quoted by other ancient authors. Chapter 3. The Garden, a revolutionary community. In 307 BCE, at the age of 34, Epicurus made the decision that would define the rest of his life and secure his place in philosophical history. He moved to Athens and established what would become known as the Garden, one of the most famous and influential philosophical communities in the ancient world. The Garden was far more than just a school. It was a complete way of life. Located on the outskirts of Athens, it consisted of a large house surrounded by extensive gardens where Epicurus and his followers lived, studied, and practiced their philosophy together. The physical setting itself embodied Epicurean principles. It was a place of beauty, tranquility, and simple pleasures, removed from the chaos and competition of urban life. What made the Garden truly revolutionary, however, was not its physical characteristics, but its social structure and values. In a world where philosophical education was typically the privilege of wealthy male citizens, the Garden welcomed everyone. Women participated as equals alongside men. Slaves studied philosophy alongside free citizens. And people from all social backgrounds were invited to join the community based on their commitment to philosophical inquiry and personal growth. Among the most notable members of the Garden were several prominent women, including Leontian, who became a respected philosopher and writer in her own right, and Themista, who was known for her contributions to Epicurean ethics. The inclusion of women as full participants in philosophical discourse was virtually unprecedented in the ancient world and drew considerable criticism from more traditional philosophers and social conservatives. The daily life in the Garden revolved around the pursuit of philosophical understanding and the cultivation of friendship. Members engaged in regular discussions about ethics, physics, and the art of living well. They shared simple meals together, tended the gardens, and participated in various forms of intellectual and creative expression. The atmosphere was one of mutual support, intellectual curiosity, and genuine care for one another's well-being. Epicurus himself lived in the Garden for the remainder of his life, serving not only as the community's intellectual leader, but also as a caring friend and mentor to its members. His approach to teaching was highly personal and individualized. Rather than delivering formal lectures or requiring students to memorize abstract doctrines, he engaged with each person's specific concerns and helped them apply philosophical principles to their particular circumstances. The economic structure of the garden was also innovative. Rather than charging fees for philosophical instruction, as was common in other schools, the garden operated on principles of mutual support and voluntary contribution. Members contributed what they could to the common welfare, and no one was excluded based on their inability to pay. This approach reflected Epicurus's belief that philosophical wisdom was a basic human need that should be freely available to all. Chapter 4. The Fourfold Medicine. At the heart of Epicurus's philosophical system was what later followers would call the tetrapharmakos, or fourfold medicine. These four principles were designed to cure the fundamental sources of human suffering and anxiety. Understanding these principles is crucial to grasping the true nature of Epicurean philosophy and its enduring relevance. The first principle: don't fear God. Contrary to popular misconceptions, Epicurus was not an atheist. He believed in the existence of gods, but his conception of divinity was radically different from the anthropomorphic deities of traditional Greek religion. For Epicurus, the gods existed in a state of perfect happiness and tranquility, completely removed from human affairs. They neither punished the wicked nor rewarded the virtuous, nor did they intervene in natural processes or human history. This view of the gods was simultaneously respectful and liberating. By removing the fear of divine punishment and the anxiety of trying to please capricious deities, Epicurus freed his followers to focus on what was truly within their control: their own thoughts, actions, and relationships. The gods, in his system, served as perfect examples of the kind of tranquil happiness that humans could aspire to achieve. The practical implications of this principle were profound. In a world where people lived in constant fear of divine retribution and spent enormous amounts of time and resources on religious rituals and sacrifices, Epicurus offered a vision of religion that was both more rational and more personally empowering. By understanding the true nature of divinity, individuals could redirect their energy toward activities that would genuinely improve their lives and the lives of others. The second principle: don't fear death. Perhaps no aspect of Epicurean philosophy has been more misunderstood than his teachings about death. His famous maxim, "Death is nothing to us," has often been interpreted as a callous dismissal of one of humanity's deepest concerns. In reality, Epicurus was offering a sophisticated and compassionate approach to one of our most fundamental anxieties. Epicurus's argument against the fear of death was based on his materialist understanding of human nature. According to his atomic theory, the soul, like the body, was composed of atoms. At death, these atoms dispersed, meaning that there was no surviving consciousness to experience either pleasure or pain. Since we can only be harmed by things we can experience, and since we cannot experience anything after death, death itself cannot harm us. This may seem like mere intellectual wordplay, but Epicurus intended it as a practical tool for reducing anxiety and improving the quality of life. By removing the fear of death, people could focus more fully on living. They could make decisions based on what would truly make them happy rather than being paralyzed by anxiety about an uncertain future. Moreover, Epicurus argued that the fear of death was often really a fear of not having lived well. By developing a clear understanding of what constitutes a good life and by actively pursuing it, people could face their mortality with greater equanimity. The goal was not to eliminate all sadness about death, but to prevent the fear of death from poisoning one's enjoyment of life. The third principle, the good is easy to achieve. This principle addressed one of the most common sources of human frustration and unhappiness, the belief that true satisfaction requires extraordinary achievements or exceptional circumstances. Epicurus argued that the most profound and lasting pleasures in life were actually quite simple and accessible to almost everyone. The good life, according to Epicurus, was not about accumulating wealth, achieving fame, or exercising power over others. Instead, it consisted of basic elements like freedom from physical pain, peace of mind, meaningful friendships, and the simple pleasures of existence. Good food, pleasant conversation, the beauty of nature, and the satisfaction of learning and understanding. This principle was revolutionary because it democratized happiness. In a society where most people believed that only the wealthy and powerful could truly be happy, Epicurus insisted that a poor person with good friends and a clear conscience could be happier than a rich person plagued by anxiety and guilt. This wasn't mere consolation for the underprivileged. It was a fundamental reorientation of values that challenged the basic assumptions of ancient society. The practical application of this principle involved learning to distinguish between natural and necessary desires, natural but unnecessary desires, and empty or vain desires. Natural and necessary desires included things like food, shelter, and friendship. These should be satisfied. Natural but unnecessary desires included things like luxurious food or elaborate housing. These could be enjoyed if available, but weren't essential for happiness. Empty desires included things like immortality or universal fame. These should be recognized as impossible and abandoned. The fourth principle, the bad is easy to endure. The final element of the fourfold medicine dealt with pain and suffering, which Epicurus recognized as inevitable aspects of human existence. However, he argued that most pain was either brief in duration or manageable in intensity, and that by understanding the nature of pain, we could reduce our suffering significantly. Epicurus distinguished between physical pain and mental anguish, arguing that mental suffering was often worse than physical pain and was frequently based on false beliefs and irrational fears. By developing correct understanding and maintaining proper perspective, people could minimize their mental suffering even when facing significant challenges. For physical pain, Epicurus observed that severe pain was typically brief, while chronic pain was usually mild enough to be bearable. He himself suffered from kidney stones and other ailments throughout his life, yet maintained his philosophical equanimity by applying these principles. In his final letter, written on his deathbed, he demonstrated remarkable courage and serenity in the face of intense physical suffering. The key to enduring pain, according to Epicurus, was to maintain perspective, seek appropriate help when available, and remember that pain, like pleasure, is temporary. By not adding unnecessary mental suffering to physical pain through catastrophic thinking or self-pity, people could maintain their dignity and peace of mind even during difficult times. Chapter 5. The True Nature of Pleasure. No aspect of Epicurean philosophy has been more misrepresented than his teachings about pleasure. The popular conception of Epicurean lifestyle, characterized by excessive indulgence in food, drink, and sensual pleasure, bears little resemblance to what Epicurus actually taught. Understanding his true views on pleasure is essential to appreciating the sophistication and practical wisdom of his philosophy. Catastematic versus kinetic pleasures. Epicurus made a crucial distinction between two types of pleasure: catastematic, static, and kinetic, active pleasures. Kinetic pleasures were those involving active enjoyment. The taste of good food, the pleasure of sex, the excitement of entertainment. While Epicurus didn't condemn these pleasures, he recognized that they were temporary, often followed by pain or dissatisfaction, and could become addictive or destructive if pursued without wisdom. Catastematic pleasures, on the other hand, were states of satisfaction and tranquility. These included peace of mind, ataraxia, freedom from physical pain, aponia, and a deep contentment that comes from understanding one's place in the world and living in accordance with one's true nature. These static pleasures were, for Epicurus, the highest form of happiness because they were stable, lasting, and didn't depend on external circumstances. The practical implication of this distinction was that true happiness came not from maximizing intense pleasures, but from minimizing pain and achieving a state of serene satisfaction. This might involve enjoying kinetic pleasures when they were available and wouldn't cause harm, but it primarily meant cultivating the conditions for lasting tranquility. The pleasure calculus. Epicurus developed what scholars now call a pleasure calculus, a method for evaluating whether a particular pleasure was worth pursuing. This involved considering not just the immediate gratification, but also the long-term consequences of any action. A pleasure that brought immediate satisfaction but led to greater pain later should be avoided, while a pain that led to greater pleasure later might be worth enduring. For example, getting drunk might provide immediate pleasure, but the hangover, potential health problems, and possible social consequences might outweigh the temporary enjoyment. Conversely, the effort required to maintain good friendships or to exercise regularly might involve some immediate discomfort. But the long-term benefits to happiness and well-being made these pains worthwhile. This approach to decision-making was remarkably sophisticated and practical. It encouraged people to think carefully about their choices rather than acting on impulse, while still affirming that pleasure and the avoidance of pain were legitimate and important goals in life. Friendship as the highest pleasure. Among all pleasures, Epicurus placed friendship at the very top. He famously declared that friendship dances around the world, announcing to all of us that we must wake up to the recognition of happiness. This wasn't mere sentiment. It was based on his careful observation of what actually made people happy and fulfilled. Friendships provided security, companionship, intellectual stimulation, and emotional support. Unlike many other pleasures, friendship became more rather than less satisfying over time. Good friends helped each other through difficulties, shared in each other's joys, and provided the kind of stable, caring relationships that were essential for peace of mind. The community of the garden was essentially an extended experiment in living according to this principle. By creating deep, lasting friendships based on mutual respect, intellectual honesty, and genuine care for one another's well-being, the Epicureans were able to achieve a level of happiness and security that was remarkable for their time and remains inspiring today. Simple pleasures and natural living. Epicurus advocated for what we might now call a simple living approach to pleasure. Rather than seeking exotic or expensive gratifications, he found deep satisfaction in basic pleasures. Good bread, fresh water, pleasant conversation, the warmth of the sun, the beauty of flowers in his garden. These simple pleasures were not only more accessible, but also more reliable than the complex pleasures that required wealth, power, or special circumstances. This approach was not about self-deprivation or asceticism. Epicurus enjoyed good food and wine when they were available, and he appreciated beauty and comfort. However, he recognized that happiness based on simple pleasures was more stable and sustainable than happiness that depended on luxury or status. The key was to develop what Epicurus called autarkia, a kind of self-sufficiency that allowed one to be content with what was naturally and easily available, while still being able to enjoy more elaborate pleasures when they came along without becoming dependent on them. Chapter 6: Physics, Atoms, and the Nature of Reality. While Epicurus is primarily remembered as a moral philosopher, his ethical teachings were actually grounded in a sophisticated understanding of physics and cosmology. His atomic theory, adapted from the earlier philosopher Democritus, provided the foundation for his approach to ethics and his vision of the good life. The atomic universe. According to Epicurus, everything in the universe, including human beings, was composed of tiny, indivisible particles called atoms moving through empty space or void. These atoms combined in various configurations to form all the objects and beings we observe. And when these configurations dissolve, the atoms continue to exist and recombine into new forms. This materialist worldview had profound implications for how Epicurus understood human nature and the possibilities for human happiness. If humans were natural beings composed of the same fundamental materials as everything else in the universe, then human flourishing should be understood in terms of what was natural and healthy for beings of our particular atomic constitution. The atomic theory also supported Epicurus's views about death. Since the soul was composed of particularly fine atoms dispersed throughout the body, death was simply the dissolution of this atomic arrangement. There was no immaterial soul that survived death, which meant there was no posthumous punishment or reward to fear or hope for. The swerve in human freedom. One of Epicurus's most ingenious contributions to atomic theory was his concept of the swerve or clinamen. Unlike Democritus, who believed that atomic motion was entirely determined by prior causes, Epicurus proposed that atoms occasionally swerve slightly from their predetermined paths without any external cause. This seemingly minor addition to atomic theory had enormous implications for ethics and human psychology. The swerve provided a physical basis for free will and moral responsibility. If our thoughts and actions were the result of atomic motions that included an element of genuine randomness, then we were not entirely determined by prior causes and could be held responsible for our choices. The swerve also explained how new combinations of atoms could arise, allowing for genuine novelty and creativity in the universe. Without some element of indeterminacy in atomic motion, the universe would be entirely predictable and static, with no room for growth, learning, or moral development. Multiple worlds and infinite possibilities. Epicurus believed that there were infinitely many worlds throughout the universe, each formed by different combinations of atoms. Some of these worlds were very similar to ours, while others were radically different. This cosmological vision reinforced his teachings about the importance of focusing on what was within our control rather than worrying about cosmic questions that were beyond human understanding. The existence of multiple worlds also suggested that the human experience, while meaningful and valuable, was not the center of the universe. This perspective encouraged both humility and a kind of cosmic optimism. Humility because it reminded people that they were small parts of a vast universe, and optimism because it suggested that the universe was abundant and creative, capable of producing infinite variations and possibilities. Natural science as therapy. For Epicurus, the study of physics was not merely an intellectual exercise, but a form of therapy. By understanding the natural causes of phenomena that might otherwise seem mysterious or frightening, people could reduce their anxiety and superstition. Earthquakes, eclipses, and diseases were not signs of divine displeasure, but natural events with natural causes. This scientific approach to understanding the world was meant to complement rather than replace the fourfold medicine. By developing a rational understanding of natural processes, people could avoid the kind of superstitious fears that prevented them from achieving tranquility and happiness. The goal was not to become a professional scientist, but to develop enough scientific literacy to distinguish between rational and irrational fears, natural and supernatural explanations, and possible and impossible desires. This kind of basic scientific understanding was, for Epicurus, an essential component of the good life. Chapter 7. Love, Sexuality, and Relationships. Epicurus's teachings about love and sexuality have often been misunderstood and misrepresented, partly because of the fragmentary nature of the surviving texts, and partly because later interpreters projected their own assumptions onto his philosophy. A careful examination of the available evidence reveals a remarkably thoughtful and balanced approach to these crucial aspects of human experience. Sexual pleasure and wisdom. Unlike many ancient philosophers who viewed sexual desire as inherently problematic or degrading, Epicurus regarded it as a natural part of human nature that could be either beneficial or harmful, depending on how it was approached. His famous statement that sexual intercourse never benefited anyone, and it's lucky if it doesn't harm, has often been misinterpreted as a condemnation of sexuality itself. In context, however, this statement appears to be a warning about the potential complications and risks associated with sexual relationships rather than a blanket rejection of sexual pleasure. Epicurus was concerned about the ways in which sexual desire could lead to jealousy, possessiveness, social conflict, and emotional suffering if not approached with wisdom and moderation. The key principle was to enjoy sexual pleasure when it was available and didn't cause harm, while recognizing that it wasn't essential for happiness. This approach was consistent with his general teaching about kinetic pleasures. They could be enjoyed when present, but shouldn't be desperately pursued or considered necessary for a good life. Love and attachment. Epicurus distinguished between different types of love and attachment, recognizing that while some forms of love contributed to happiness and tranquility, others could be sources of considerable suffering. Passionate romantic love, while potentially intense and pleasurable, was also unpredictable and often led to jealousy, anxiety, and disappointment. More stable and reliable were the forms of love based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine care for another's well-being. These might include deep friendships, companionate marriages, and the kind of community bonds that existed within the garden. Such relationships provided security and support without the volatility and possessiveness that often characterized more passionate attachments. This didn't mean that Epicurus advocated for purely platonic relationships or emotional detachment. Rather, he encouraged people to cultivate forms of love that were sustainable and mutually beneficial, while being cautious about relationships that involved excessive dependency or emotional turmoil. Women and equality. One of the most revolutionary aspects of Epicurean practice was the full inclusion of women as equal participants in philosophical life. In a society where women were typically excluded from formal education and public discourse, the garden welcomed women not only as students, but as teachers and intellectual leaders. This inclusiveness reflected Epicurus's belief that philosophical wisdom was a human rather than specifically masculine capacity. Women like Leontian wrote philosophical treatises that were respected even by critics of Epicureanism, demonstrating that intellectual ability was not determined by gender. The presence of women in the garden also created opportunities for more natural and balanced relationships between men and women. Rather than relating primarily through formal marriage arrangements or commercial sexual transactions, male and female members of the community could develop friendships and partnerships based on intellectual compatibility and mutual respect. Marriage and family. Epicurus's personal choice not to marry was sometimes interpreted as a rejection of marriage as an institution. but his actual teachings were more nuanced. He recognized that marriage could provide companionship, security, and the pleasures of family life for those who chose it wisely. The key was to approach marriage, like any other major life decision, through the lens of the pleasure calculus. A marriage that brought genuine companionship, mutual support, and shared happiness was valuable, while a marriage based on social obligation, financial calculation, or passionate infatuation without deeper compatibility was likely to cause more pain than pleasure. For those who chose to have children, Epicurus emphasized the importance of raising them with wisdom and love, helping them develop the intellectual and emotional skills they would need to live good lives. However, he also recognized that parenthood involved significant responsibilities and potential sources of anxiety that not everyone was suited for. Chapter 8. Politics, Society, and Justice. Epicurus's approach to political and social questions was shaped by his fundamental commitment to tranquility and his realistic assessment of human nature. Unlike many ancient philosophers who were deeply engaged in political affairs, Epicurus generally advocated for a stance of informed withdrawal from the turbulent world of politics and public life. The limits of political engagement. The famous Epicurean maxim, live unknown, leithbioses, has often been interpreted as a recommendation for complete social withdrawal and selfishness. However, a more careful reading of Epicurean texts suggests that this principle was meant to encourage people to focus their energy on activities where they could make a genuine difference rather than getting caught up in the often futile struggles for political power and social status. Epicurus had witnessed firsthand the violence and instability that characterized Greek political life in his era. He had seen how the pursuit of political power could corrupt even well-intentioned individuals, and how political involvement often led to anxiety, compromise, and moral degradation. From this perspective, withdrawal from politics was not cowardice, but wisdom. However, this withdrawal was not meant to be absolute or irresponsible. Epicureans were expected to fulfill their basic civic duties, obey just laws, and avoid actions that would harm their communities. The goal was to minimize unnecessary political entanglements while maintaining ethical standards and social responsibility. Justice and social cooperation. Despite their political quietism, Epicureans had a sophisticated understanding of justice and social cooperation. Epicurus defined justice as a kind of mutual agreement among people not to harm each other and to cooperate for mutual benefit. This contractual view of justice was remarkably modern and practical. According to this understanding, laws and social institutions were valuable insofar as they promoted security and mutual advantage. People agreed to follow certain rules and accept certain limitations on their behavior, because doing so created a social environment where everyone could pursue happiness more effectively than they could in a state of conflict and competition. This approach to justice was both more flexible and more universal than many ancient theories. It didn't depend on divine command, natural law, or cultural tradition, but rather on the practical recognition that cooperation typically served everyone's interests better than conflict. At the same time, it provided a basis for criticizing laws and institutions that served only the interests of the powerful while oppressing others. Economic philosophy. While Epicurus didn't develop a systematic economic theory, his teachings had clear implications for how people should approach questions of wealth and material security. The principle that the good is easy to achieve suggested that most people could find happiness without great wealth, while the pleasure calculus provided tools for making wise economic decisions. Epicurus recognized that a certain level of material security was necessary for tranquility. People who were constantly worried about basic necessities like food and shelter would have difficulty achieving peace of mind. However, he also observed that beyond meeting basic needs, additional wealth often created more problems than it solved. The pursuit of great wealth typically required sacrificing time and energy that could be better spent on friendship, learning, and simple pleasures. Moreover, wealthy people often lived in constant anxiety about losing their fortunes, faced more complex social and political pressures, and had difficulty distinguishing between genuine friends and those who were attracted primarily by their money. Slavery and social hierarchy. One of the most challenging aspects of Epicurean philosophy for modern readers is the question of how it addressed slavery and other forms of social inequality. While the garden included slaves as full participants in philosophical life, there's little evidence that Epicurus explicitly challenged the institution of slavery itself. However, the logic of Epicurean ethics pointed toward a more egalitarian understanding of human worth and potential. If philosophical wisdom was the highest good and was available to all people regardless of their social status, then the conventional hierarchies of ancient society had no ultimate justification. The practice of the garden, where slaves, women, and people from various social backgrounds participated as equals in intellectual discourse, was itself a radical challenge to prevailing social norms. While Epicurus may not have articulated a systematic critique of social inequality, his community embodied principles that were fundamentally at odds with hierarchical social structures. Chapter 9. The Art of Living, Daily Practices and Exercises. Epicurean philosophy was never meant to be merely an intellectual exercise or a set of abstract theories. It was designed as a practical guide to living well, and Epicurus and his followers developed various practices and exercises to help people apply philosophical principles in their daily lives. The practice of philosophical reflection. Central to the Epicurean way of life was the habit of regular philosophical reflection. This might take the form of morning meditation on the principles of the fourfold medicine, evening examination of the day's experiences in light of Epicurean teachings, or ongoing contemplation of philosophical questions during routine activities. Epicurus encouraged his followers to memorize key philosophical principles and to recall them frequently, especially during times of difficulty or confusion. He believed that philosophical wisdom needed to be internalized and practiced, not merely understood intellectually. The goal was to develop what we might now call philosophical reflexes, automatic ways of thinking and responding that promoted tranquility and wise decision-making. This practice of reflection was meant to be gentle and supportive rather than harsh and self-critical. The aim was not to achieve perfection, but to gradually develop greater wisdom and self-awareness. Mistakes and setbacks were seen as natural parts of the learning process rather than failures to be punished. Letter writing and philosophical correspondence. Epicurus was a prolific letter writer, and correspondence played a crucial role in maintaining the bonds of friendship that held the Epicurean community together. Members of the garden who were traveling or living in other cities maintained regular contact with Epicurus and each other through letters that often contained philosophical discussions, practical advice, and expressions of mutual affection. These letters served multiple purposes. They allowed for the continued development and refinement of philosophical ideas through dialogue and debate. They provided emotional support and encouragement during difficult times, and they helped maintain the sense of community and shared purpose that was so central to the Epicurean way of life. Modern readers can adapt this practice by maintaining thoughtful correspondence with friends and family, using writing as a tool for reflection and self-understanding, and approaching their communications with others as opportunities for mutual learning and support. The cultivation of friendship. For Epicureans, friendship was not just a pleasant addition to life, but a fundamental requirement for happiness and wisdom. They developed specific practices for cultivating and maintaining deep, meaningful relationships with others. This involved learning to be genuinely interested in others' well-being, developing skills in empathetic listening and thoughtful communication, and being willing to offer practical help and support when needed. It also meant being vulnerable and authentic in relationships, sharing one's true thoughts and feelings rather than maintaining artificial social facades. Epicureans also practiced what we might call friendship maintenance, making regular efforts to stay in touch with friends, remembering important events in their lives, and making time for shared activities and conversations even when life became busy or stressful. Simple living and gratitude. The practice of simple living was not about self-deprivation, but about learning to find satisfaction and joy in readily available pleasures. This involved developing what Epicurus called a grateful mind, the ability to appreciate and enjoy simple experiences like good food, natural beauty, comfortable shelter, and peaceful moments. Epicureans practiced various forms of gratitude exercises, consciously reflecting on the good things in their lives and avoiding the trap of taking these blessings for granted. They also worked to distinguish between genuine needs and artificial desires created by social pressure or personal insecurity. This approach to simple living was meant to increase rather than decrease pleasure. By learning to find deep satisfaction in basic pleasures, people became less dependent on external circumstances for their happiness and more able to enjoy whatever good things came their way. The garden as a model community. The structure and practices of the garden provided a concrete example of how Epicurean principles could be applied in daily life. The community was organized around shared meals, collaborative work, intellectual discussion, and mutual support. Members contributed their various skills and resources to the common welfare while maintaining their individual dignity and autonomy. Decision-making in the garden appears to have been collaborative rather than authoritarian, with Epicurus serving more as a wise friend and advisor than as a traditional teacher or ruler. This approach reflected the Epicurean belief that wisdom should be shared rather than hoarded, and that everyone had something valuable to contribute to the community's well-being. Modern readers can apply these insights by working to create supportive communities in their own lives, whether through family relationships, friendships, neighborhood connections, or shared interest groups. The key is to approach community life with the same principles that guided the garden: mutual respect, genuine care for others' well-being, intellectual honesty, and commitment to shared growth and learning. Chapter 10. Misconceptions and Misrepresentations. Throughout history, Epicurean philosophy has been subject to numerous misunderstandings and deliberate distortions. These misconceptions have often overshadowed the genuine insights and practical wisdom of Epicurus' teachings, creating a popular image of Epicureanism that bears little resemblance to the actual philosophy. Understanding these distortions is crucial for appreciating the true value of Epicurean thought. The myth of hedonistic excess. Perhaps the most persistent misconception about Epicureanism is the idea that it advocates for unlimited indulgence in sensual pleasures. This caricature portrays Epicureans as devoted to excessive eating, drinking, and sexual activity, a lifestyle more accurately described as libertinism or debauchery than as philosophical wisdom. This distortion arose partly from the natural human tendency to misunderstand complex ideas and partly from deliberate misrepresentation by critics who found Epicurean teachings threatening to established religious and social authorities. Early Christian writers, in particular, found it useful to portray Epicureanism as morally corrupt in order to contrast it with Christian virtue. In reality, Epicurus advocated for moderation and wisdom in the pursuit of pleasure. He distinguished carefully between different types of pleasures and emphasized that true happiness came from tranquility and simple satisfactions rather than from intense or exotic gratifications. His own lifestyle was remarkably moderate. He was known to be content with simple food, plain water when wine wasn't available, and the company of close friends. The genuine Epicurean approach to pleasure was sophisticated and disciplined. It required careful thought about the consequences of one's actions, honest self-reflection about one's true needs and desires, and the development of stable sources of satisfaction that didn't depend on external circumstances or create harmful dependencies. Religious persecution and atheist accusations. Another major source of distortion was the persistent accusation that Epicurus was an atheist who sought to undermine religious belief and moral order. This charge was particularly damaging in the ancient world, where atheism was often associated with social corruption and political subversion. As we've seen, Epicurus was not actually an atheist, but held a sophisticated theological position that honored the gods while rejecting anthropomorphic conceptions of divinity. His gods were perfect beings who existed in a state of blessed tranquility, neither interfering in human affairs nor requiring human worship and sacrifice. This theological position was actually quite respectful toward divinity while being practically liberating for human beings. By removing the fear of divine punishment and the anxiety of trying to placate unpredictable deities, Epicurus allowed people to focus their energy on activities that would genuinely improve their lives and relationships. However, this rational approach to religion threatened the interests of traditional religious authorities and was easily misrepresented as impious skepticism. The fact that Epicurus questioned popular religious beliefs and practices made him an easy target for accusations of atheism and immorality. Political misunderstandings. The Epicurean principle of political withdrawal has often been mischaracterized as selfishness, cowardice, or irresponsible escapism. Critics have accused Epicureans of abandoning their civic duties and retreating into private pleasure while ignoring the needs of their communities. This interpretation misses the nuanced reasoning behind Epicurean political philosophy. Epicurus advocated for withdrawal from politics not because he was indifferent to social welfare, but because he believed that most political involvement was ineffective and personally destructive. The political systems of his time were characterized by violence, corruption, and instability that made genuine reform nearly impossible. Rather than encouraging complete social isolation, Epicurus promoted the creation of alternative communities based on friendship, mutual support, and shared commitment to wisdom and virtue. The garden was itself a form of social organization that demonstrated how people could live together harmoniously without the hierarchies and conflicts that characterize conventional political structures. Moreover, many Epicureans throughout history have been deeply engaged in social reform and humanitarian causes. The philosophy's emphasis on reducing suffering and promoting human flourishing has inspired countless individuals to work for social justice, educational reform, and the alleviation of poverty and oppression. Intellectual superficiality. Some critics have dismissed Epicureanism as intellectually shallow or philosophically naive, particularly in comparison to the complex metaphysical systems developed by Plato, Aristotle, and other ancient thinkers. This criticism reflects a misunderstanding of Epicurean methodology and goals. Epicurus deliberately avoided abstract theoretical speculation in favor of practical wisdom that could actually improve people's lives. He was skeptical of philosophical systems that were intellectually impressive, but had little bearing on the actual challenges of human existence. His focus on clarity, simplicity, and practical application was a conscious choice based on his understanding of what philosophy should accomplish. The atomic theory that underlies Epicurean ethics was actually quite sophisticated and anticipated many insights of modern science. The pleasure calculus provided a nuanced framework for ethical decision-making that was both psychologically realistic and practically useful. The analysis of friendship, community, and human relationships demonstrated remarkable insight into social psychology and interpersonal dynamics. The apparent simplicity of Epicurean teachings reflects their practical orientation rather than intellectual superficiality. Like many profound insights, Epicurean principles are easy to understand, but challenging to apply consistently in daily life. Chapter 11. The Later History of Epicureanism. The influence of Epicurean philosophy extended far beyond the lifetime of its founder and the boundaries of the garden in Athens. Throughout antiquity and into the modern era, Epicurean ideas have continued to inspire thinkers, writers, and reformers who found in them resources for understanding human nature and pursuing the good life. The Roman reception. Epicureanism found particularly fertile ground in Roman culture, where it attracted numerous followers among intellectuals, poets, and even some political figures. The Roman poet Lucretius, 99 to 55 BC, wrote De Rerum Natura, on the nature of things, a brilliant poetic exposition of Epicurean philosophy that remains one of our most important sources for understanding Epicurean thought. Lucretius's poem was remarkable not only for its literary merit, but also for its passionate commitment to Epicurean principles as a source of human liberation. He saw Epicurean philosophy as a powerful antidote to the superstition, anxiety, and political violence that plagued Roman society. His vivid descriptions of atomic theory, his moving passages about the nature of love and death, and his eloquent defense of philosophical reason made Epicureanism accessible to a broader audience. Other notable Roman Epicureans included Diogenes of Enoanda, who had Epicurean teachings carved into stone walls for public display, and various members of the Roman aristocracy who found in Epicureanism a refuge from the demands and corruptions of political life. The philosophy's emphasis on friendship and private virtue appealed to many Romans who were disillusioned with the increasing violence and instability of public life. However, Roman Epicureanism also faced significant opposition, particularly from Stoic philosophers and traditional religious authorities who viewed its teachings as potentially subversive to Roman values of duty, honor, and civic engagement. The tension between Epicurean and Stoic approaches to life became one of the defining intellectual debates of the Roman era. Early Christian opposition. The rise of Christianity presented new challenges for Epicurean philosophy. Many early Christian writers, including St. Jerome and St. Augustine, viewed Epicureanism as fundamentally opposed to Christian teachings about God, morality, and the afterlife. Christian critics were particularly troubled by Epicurean teachings about the nature of the gods, the mortality of the soul, and the pursuit of pleasure as the highest good. These doctrines seem to contradict basic Christian beliefs about divine providence, eternal salvation, and the importance of self-sacrifice and suffering. However, the relationship between Epicureanism and Christianity was more complex than these polemical attacks suggested. Some early Christian thinkers found useful insights in Epicurean ethics, particularly the emphasis on love, community, and care for the suffering. The Epicurean critique of superstition and fear-based religion also resonated with some Christians who sought a more rational and compassionate approach to faith. The decline of Epicureanism in late antiquity was due partly to Christian opposition, but also to broader cultural changes that favored more otherworldly and ascetic approaches to philosophy and religion. The practical, this worldly orientation of Epicurean thought seemed less relevant in an age increasingly focused on transcendent spiritual concerns. Renaissance and Enlightenment revival. The rediscovery of ancient texts during the Renaissance led to renewed interest in Epicurean philosophy. Humanist scholars were attracted to Epicureanism's emphasis on human dignity, rational inquiry, and the pursuit of happiness in this life rather than in some future existence. The French philosopher Pierre Gassendi, 1592 to 1655, played a particularly important role in reviving Epicurean atomism and integrating it with Christian theology. Gassendi argued that atomic theory was compatible with belief in God and could provide a foundation for both natural science and ethical philosophy. His work influenced later thinkers, including John Locke and Isaac Newton. During the Enlightenment, many philosophers found in Epicureanism a philosophical tradition that anticipated their own commitments to reason, empirical observation, and human welfare. Voltaire, Diderot, and other French philosophes saw Epicurus as a forerunner of their own efforts to promote rational thought and social reform. The utilitarian philosophers Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill drew extensively on Epicurean insights about pleasure, pain, and the calculation of happiness. While they developed these ideas in new directions, their basic approach to ethics was recognizably Epicurean in its focus on promoting the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. Modern interpretations and applications. In the 19th and 20th centuries, Epicurean philosophy continued to influence various intellectual and cultural movements. Marxist philosophers found in Epicurean materialism a precedent for their own rejection of religious and idealistic explanations of reality. Psychologists and social scientists discovered in Epicurean analyses of pleasure, anxiety, and social relationships insights that anticipated modern understanding of human motivation and behavior. The existentialist philosophers of the 20th century, while differing from Epicureanism in many ways, shared its concern with authentic individual existence and its rejection of abstract theoretical systems that ignored the concrete realities of human experience. Writers like Albert Camus found in Epicurean teachings about mortality and the absurd a source of inspiration for their own philosophical reflections. Contemporary positive psychology has rediscovered many Epicurean insights about happiness, well-being, and human flourishing. Research on hedonic adaptation, the importance of social relationships, and the limits of material consumption has validated many of Epicurus's observations about what actually makes people happy and fulfilled. Environmental philosophers and advocates of sustainable living have found in Epicurean teachings about simple pleasures and natural living a philosophical foundation for their critiques of consumerism and their promotion of more ecological ways of life. Epicureanism in popular culture. Unfortunately, popular culture has often perpetuated rather than corrected the historical misunderstandings of Epicureanism. The word Epicurean continues to be used primarily to describe expensive tastes or hedonistic lifestyles rather than philosophical wisdom and ethical reflection. However, there have been some efforts to present a more accurate understanding of Epicurean philosophy to general audiences. Popular books on philosophy, happiness, and the art of living have increasingly recognized the sophistication and relevance of Epicurean teachings. Some contemporary self-help and wellness movements have drawn inspiration from Epicurean practices, though often without acknowledging the philosophical foundations of these approaches. The challenge for modern interpreters of Epicureanism is to preserve the genuine insights of the philosophy while adapting them to contemporary circumstances and concerns. This requires careful scholarship to distinguish authentic Epicurean teachings from later distortions, as well as creative thinking about how ancient wisdom can address modern problems. Chapter 12: Epicureanism and Modern Science. One of the most remarkable aspects of Epicurean philosophy is how many of its insights have been validated by modern scientific research. While Epicurus could not have anticipated the specific discoveries of contemporary psychology, neuroscience, and social science, his careful observations of human nature and behavior led him to conclusions that align surprisingly well with current scientific understanding. Atomic theory and modern physics. Epicurus's atomic theory, adapted from Democritus, was remarkably prescient in its basic insights about the nature of matter. While ancient atomic theory lacked the mathematical precision and experimental validation of modern atomic physics, the fundamental idea that all matter is composed of indivisible particles moving through empty space has been confirmed by centuries of scientific investigation. The Epicurean concept of the swerve, the idea that atomic motion includes an element of genuine randomness, anticipated aspects of quantum mechanics that would not be discovered until the 20th century. The recognition that deterministic laws might not completely govern atomic behavior showed remarkable philosophical sophistication and openness to possibilities that seemed counterintuitive but proved to be correct. Modern physics has also validated the Epicurean insight that the universe is far larger and more complex than it appears to human observation. The idea of multiple worlds, while not confirmed in exactly the form that Epicurus imagined, has found expression in contemporary theories about parallel universes and the multiverse. Psychology of happiness and well-being. Contemporary psychological research has provided extensive empirical support for many of Epicurus's observations about what makes people happy and fulfilled. Studies consistently show that beyond meeting basic needs, additional income and material possessions contribute relatively little to subjective well-being, while relationships, meaningful activity, and peace of mind are strong predictors of life satisfaction. The Epicurean distinction between catastematic and kinetic pleasures has been validated by research on hedonic adaptation and the psychology of pleasure. Scientists have found that people quickly adapt to positive changes in their circumstances, returning to baseline levels of happiness despite improvements in their external conditions. This supports Epicurus's insight that lasting happiness comes from stable internal states rather than external acquisitions. Research on social relationships has overwhelmingly confirmed the Epicurean emphasis on friendship as crucial for human flourishing. Studies of longevity, mental health, and life satisfaction consistently identify strong social connections as among the most important factors in human well-being. The quality rather than quantity of relationships appears to be most important, which aligns with Epicurean teachings about deep, meaningful friendships. Neuroscience and the nature of pleasure. Neuroscientific research has revealed the biological mechanisms underlying pleasure and pain in ways that support many Epicurean insights. The discovery of neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, and endorphins has provided a physical basis for understanding how different experiences affect mood and well-being. Scientists have found that the brain's reward systems are designed to motivate behavior that promoted survival and reproduction in ancestral environments. This explains why humans often pursue pleasures that may not serve their long-term well-being in modern contexts, a problem that Epicurus addressed through his pleasure calculus and emphasis on rational reflection about desires. Research on mindfulness and contemplative practices has validated Epicurean approaches to reducing anxiety and achieving peace of mind. Studies show that regular meditation and reflective practices can literally change brain structure in ways that promote emotional regulation and stress resilience. Social psychology and group dynamics. Modern social psychology has confirmed many Epicurean observations about human social behavior and the conditions that promote cooperation and mutual benefit. Research on group dynamics shows that communities based on shared values, mutual respect, and genuine care for members' welfare tend to be more stable and satisfying than those based primarily on external rewards or hierarchical authority. Studies of utopian communities and intentional communities have found that the most successful ones often embody principles similar to those that guided the garden. Clear shared purposes, democratic decision-making, and balance between individual autonomy and collective responsibility. Research on pro-social behavior and altruism has shown that acts of kindness and generosity typically benefit the giver as well as the receiver, supporting the Epicurean insight that virtue and self-interest are ultimately compatible when properly understood. Environmental psychology and simple living. Contemporary research on environmental psychology and the effects of lifestyle choices on well-being has provided support for Epicurean teachings about simple living and natural pleasures. Studies show that people who spend time in natural environments, engage in physical activity, and maintain simple lifestyles often report higher levels of life satisfaction than those who pursue more complex and resource-intensive pleasures. Research on materialism and consumer behavior has confirmed that people who focus primarily on acquiring possessions and status symbols tend to be less happy and more anxious than those who prioritize relationships, personal growth, and meaningful experiences. This validates the Epicurean critique of empty desires and the emphasis on distinguishing between genuine needs and artificial wants. Clinical psychology and therapeutic applications. Many contemporary therapeutic approaches incorporate insights that parallel Epicurean teachings. Cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, emphasizes the importance of examining and challenging irrational fears and catastrophic thinking, an approach very similar to Epicurean methods for achieving tranquility. Acceptance and commitment therapy draws on principles similar to those underlying the fourfold medicine, helping people accept what they cannot control while taking effective action in areas where they do have influence. The emphasis on values-based living and psychological flexibility echoes Epicurean teachings about focusing on what is truly important and adapting wisely to changing circumstances. Positive psychology interventions that focus on gratitude, savoring positive experiences, and building strong relationships are remarkably similar to traditional Epicurean practices. The scientific validation of these approaches suggests that Epicurus's observations about human flourishing were not only philosophically profound, but also empirically accurate. Chapter 13. Practical Applications for Modern Life. Understanding Epicurean philosophy as an intellectual exercise is one thing. Applying its insights to the challenges and opportunities of contemporary life is another. This chapter explores how modern people can draw on Epicurean wisdom to enhance their well-being, improve their relationships, and create more fulfilling lives. Developing a personal philosophy. One of the most valuable aspects of Epicurean philosophy is its emphasis on developing a coherent personal philosophy based on careful observation and rational reflection. In our age of information overload and competing ideologies, the need for clear thinking about fundamental life questions is perhaps greater than ever. The first step in developing an Epicurean approach to modern life is to engage seriously with the fourfold medicine. What are your deepest fears and anxieties? How much of your worry is focused on things beyond your control? What brings you genuine satisfaction and peace of mind? How can you distinguish between desires that serve your authentic well-being and those that are imposed by social pressure or marketing manipulation? This kind of self-examination requires honest introspection and the willingness to question assumptions that may have gone unexamined for years. It also requires patience, as developing philosophical wisdom is a gradual process that unfolds over time rather than happening all at once. Modern practitioners might adapt traditional Epicurean practices like regular reflection and philosophical correspondence by keeping a journal, engaging in thoughtful discussions with friends, or participating in philosophy discussion groups. The key is to make philosophical reflection a regular part of life, rather than an occasional intellectual exercise. Building and maintaining friendships. Perhaps no aspect of Epicurean philosophy is more directly applicable to modern life than its emphasis on friendship. In an age of social media connections and professional networking, the Epicurean understanding of deep, authentic friendship offers a valuable alternative to shallow social relationships. Building genuine friendships in the Epicurean sense requires several commitments. First, it means being genuinely interested in others' well-being rather than simply using relationships for personal advantage. This involves developing skills in empathetic listening, offering support during difficult times, and celebrating others' successes without jealousy or competition. Second, it means being willing to be vulnerable and authentic in relationships. This can be challenging in a culture that often encourages people to present carefully curated versions of themselves rather than revealing their true thoughts, feelings, and struggles. However, the rewards of authentic connection make this risk worthwhile. Third, it means making friendship a priority even when life becomes busy or stressful. This might involve scheduling regular time with friends, maintaining correspondence with those who live far away, or creating new friendships through shared activities or interests. Modern technology can be a valuable tool for maintaining friendships, but it works best when it supplements rather than replaces face-to-face interaction. The goal is to use technology to enhance genuine connection rather than a substitute for it. Work and career. Epicurean philosophy offers valuable guidance for navigating questions about work and career in ways that promote both personal fulfillment and social contribution. The key is to apply the pleasure calculus to professional decisions, considering not only financial rewards, but also the impact of different choices on overall well-being. This might mean choosing work that provides genuine satisfaction and meaning rather than simply maximizing income. It could involve seeking positions that allow for good relationships with colleagues, reasonable work-life balance, and opportunities for personal growth and learning. The Epicurean emphasis on simple living can be particularly valuable in career decisions. By distinguishing between genuine needs and artificial desires, people can often find that they need less money than they initially thought, which opens up possibilities for more fulfilling but less lucrative work. At the same time, Epicurean philosophy recognizes the importance of basic security and the anxiety that comes from financial instability. The goal is not to embrace poverty, but to find a level of material security that allows for peace of mind without requiring the sacrifice of other important values, money and material possessions. The Epicurean approach to money and possessions offers a middle path between the extremes of materialistic consumerism and ascetic renunciation. The key insight is that money and possessions are valuable insofar as they contribute to genuine well-being, but become problematic when they become ends in themselves or sources of anxiety. Practical applications might include developing a clear understanding of what constitutes enough in various areas of life: housing, clothing, food, entertainment, and so on. This allows for conscious choices about spending that are based on genuine needs and values rather than impulse or social pressure. The practice of gratitude for what one already has can be particularly valuable in a consumer culture that constantly promotes dissatisfaction with current circumstances. Regular reflection on the positive aspects of one's current situation can reduce the compulsive desire for new acquisitions. At the same time, Epicurean philosophy doesn't require self-deprivation or the rejection of beauty, comfort, or enjoyment. The goal is to approach material pleasures with wisdom and moderation, enjoying them when they're available while not becoming dependent on them for happiness. Health and physical well-being. Epicurean philosophy's emphasis on the body as well as the mind offers valuable guidance for maintaining physical health and well-being. The principle of avoiding pain while pursuing appropriate pleasures can be applied to decisions about diet, exercise, sleep, and other health-related behaviors. This might involve finding forms of physical activity that are genuinely enjoyable rather than viewing exercise as a form of punishment or moral obligation. It could mean developing eating habits that provide both nutritional value and sensory pleasure, avoiding both the extremes of junk food consumption and obsessive dietary restriction. The Epicurean understanding of pleasure can also be applied to rest and relaxation. In a culture that often glorifies busyness and productivity at the expense of leisure and reflection, making time for genuine rest and simple pleasures becomes an act of philosophical wisdom. Dealing with stress and anxiety. The fourfold medicine provides a framework for addressing many of the stresses and anxieties that characterize modern life. By distinguishing between rational and irrational fears, people can focus their energy on addressing genuine problems while reducing unnecessary worry about things beyond their control. The Epicurean approach to death anxiety can be particularly valuable in a culture that often avoids honest discussion of mortality. By developing a mature understanding of death as a natural part of life rather than a cosmic injustice or ultimate failure, people can often reduce the background anxiety that affects many life decisions. Similarly, the Epicurean critique of empty desires can help people identify sources of stress that come from pursuing goals that don't actually contribute to well-being. This might include excessive concern with social status, unrealistic expectations about career success, or the pursuit of experiences that are primarily motivated by social media presentation rather than genuine enjoyment. Creating community. While few people today have the opportunity to create communities like the garden, the principles that guided Epicurean community life can be applied in various contemporary contexts. This might involve creating or joining groups based on shared interests and values, organizing regular gatherings with friends and family, or participating in community organizations that promote mutual support and collective well-being. The key is to approach community involvement with the same principles that guided the garden: genuine care for others' well-being, commitment to honest communication, respect for individual differences, and focus on activities that promote mutual flourishing rather than competition or exploitation. Chapter 14. The Death of Epicurus and His Final Teachings. As our exploration of Epicurean philosophy draws toward its close, it's fitting that we examine how Epicurus himself faced the ultimate test of his teachings, his own death. The manner in which he approached his final illness and death provides a powerful demonstration of how philosophical wisdom can be lived rather than merely discussed. The final illness. In his later years, Epicurus suffered from painful kidney stones and other ailments that caused him considerable physical suffering. For a philosopher who taught that the avoidance of pain was one of life's primary goals, this situation might have seemed like a contradiction or failure of his teachings. However, Epicurus's response to his illness demonstrated the deeper dimensions of his philosophy. Rather than becoming bitter or abandoning his philosophical principles, Epicurus used his experience of pain as an opportunity to exemplify his teachings about the relationship between physical suffering and mental tranquility. He showed that while physical pain was unavoidable, it need not destroy one's peace of mind or fundamental happiness. His letters from this period reveal a man who maintained his philosophical composure and continued to find joy in friendship, intellectual discourse, and simple pleasures even while experiencing significant physical discomfort. This wasn't a matter of stoic denial of pain, but rather a demonstration of how correct understanding could prevent physical suffering from overwhelming one's entire existence. The letter to Idomeneus. On his deathbed, Epicurus wrote what has become known as the letter to Idomeneus, one of the most moving documents in the history of philosophy. In this final communication, he demonstrated the practical application of his teachings about mortality, pain, and the sources of genuine happiness. I have written this letter to you on a happy day to me, which is also the last day of my life, he began. For I have been attacked by a painful inability to urinate, and also dysentery, so violent that nothing can be added to the violence of my sufferings. But the cheerfulness of my mind, which comes from the recollection of all my philosophical contemplation, counterbalances all these afflictions. This remarkable statement encapsulates several key aspects of Epicurean philosophy. First, it demonstrates the distinction between physical pain and mental suffering. While Epicurus could not avoid the former, he was able to prevent it from destroying the latter. Second, it shows how philosophical reflection could serve as a source of strength and comfort during times of crisis. The letter continues, and I want you to look after the children of Metrodorus in a manner worthy of the devotion shown by the young man to me and to philosophy. Even in his final moments, Epicurus was thinking about the welfare of others and the continuation of the philosophical community that had been so central to his life and teachings. Death as the ultimate teacher. For Epicurus, death was not an enemy to be feared or defeated, but a natural process that could deepen one's understanding of what truly mattered in life. His approach to his own mortality demonstrated several key insights that had profound implications for how his followers understood both death and life. First, he showed that death could serve as a clarifying force that helped distinguish between essential and non-essential concerns. Faced with mortality, many of the anxieties and ambitions that typically consume human attention revealed themselves as relatively unimportant compared to fundamental goods like friendship, wisdom, and peace of mind. Second, he demonstrated that a life lived according to philosophical principles could provide a kind of security and satisfaction that external circumstances could not destroy. Even facing death, Epicurus could reflect on his life with genuine happiness because he had focused on goods that were truly valuable and lasting. Third, he showed that death need not be faced in isolation. The community of friends and fellow philosophers that he had cultivated throughout his life provided support and comfort during his final illness. Their presence and continued commitment to his teachings offered a form of immortality that transcended individual biological existence. The continuation of the teaching. One of the most remarkable aspects of Epicurus's approach to death was his concern for the continuation of his philosophical work. Rather than focusing exclusively on his own suffering or fate, he devoted considerable energy to ensuring that his teachings would survive and continue to benefit others. He designated Hermarchus as his successor in leading the garden and provided detailed instruction for the care of the community and its members. He also arranged for the preservation and copying of his writings, recognizing that philosophical ideas could outlive their originators and continue to provide guidance for future generations. This concern for philosophical legacy reflected the Epicurean understanding that while individual consciousness ended at death, the ideas and communities that people created during their lives could have lasting impact. By focusing on contributions that would benefit others, individuals could find meaning and purpose that transcended their own mortality. The paradox of pleasure and pain. Perhaps the most profound aspect of Epicurus's final days was his demonstration of how genuine pleasure, understood as tranquility and deep satisfaction, could coexist with physical pain and the approach of death. This wasn't a matter of denial or false optimism, but rather the result of a lifetime of philosophical practice and understanding. The pleasure that Epicurus experienced during his final illness came from several sources. The satisfaction of having lived according to his principles, the joy of deep friendships that provided comfort and meaning, the peace of mind that came from correct understanding of death and mortality, and the knowledge that his work would continue to benefit others. This demonstration was particularly powerful because it was not theoretical but lived. Epicurus didn't simply teach that philosophy could provide comfort in the face of death. He showed through his own example that these teachings could actually work when put to the ultimate test. Lessons for contemporary life. The example of Epicurus's death offers several important lessons for modern people facing their own mortality or supporting others through illness and dying. First, it demonstrates the importance of developing philosophical resources and practices throughout life rather than waiting until crisis moments to think seriously about fundamental questions. Second, it shows the crucial role that community and friendship play in providing meaning and support during difficult times. The relationships that Epicurus had cultivated throughout his life became sources of strength and comfort when he needed them most. Third, it illustrates how a life focused on genuine goods, wisdom, friendship, virtue, and simple pleasures can provide a foundation of satisfaction that external circumstances cannot destroy. By investing in what truly matters, people can develop resilience that serves them well during inevitable times of loss and suffering. Finally, Epicurus's example suggests that death can be approached not as ultimate defeat, but as the completion of a life well lived. By focusing on contributions that will outlast individual existence, and by finding satisfaction in the good that one has experienced and shared with others, it becomes possible to face mortality with equanimity and even gratitude. Chapter 15. The Enduring Legacy. As we reach the conclusion of our journey through the life and teachings of Epicurus, it's important to consider the lasting impact of his philosophy and its continued relevance for contemporary life. The influence of Epicurean thought extends far beyond the boundaries of formal philosophical study and touches many aspects of how we understand happiness, community, mortality, and the art of living well. Philosophical contributions. Epicurus made several enduring contributions to philosophical thought that continue to influence thinkers today. His development of a sophisticated hedonistic ethics provided an alternative to both the demanding virtue ethics of the Stoics and the abstract idealism of the Platonists. By grounding ethics in careful observation of human psychology and the actual conditions of human flourishing, he anticipated many insights of contemporary moral psychology and positive psychology. His atomic materialism, while lacking the mathematical precision of modern physics, demonstrated the possibility of understanding natural phenomena through purely naturalistic explanation. This approach helped lay the groundwork for the scientific worldview that would eventually replace supernatural explanations of natural events. Perhaps most importantly, his integration of ethics, physics, and psychology into a coherent practical philosophy demonstrated how philosophical thinking could serve as a tool for improving actual human lives rather than remaining in the realm of abstract speculation. Literary and cultural impact. The influence of Epicurean ideas on literature and culture has been profound and persistent. From Lucretius's great poem on the nature of things to contemporary works of fiction and poetry, writers have found in Epicurean themes rich material for exploring the human condition. The tension between pleasure and virtue, the relationship between individual happiness and social responsibility, and the challenge of living fully in the face of mortality have provided enduring themes for artistic exploration. Many works that don't explicitly reference Epicurus nevertheless embody Epicurean insights about the importance of friendship, the value of simple pleasures, and a need for philosophical reflection. The persistent misrepresentation of Epicureanism in popular culture has also had its own cultural impact, creating a vocabulary for discussing questions about pleasure, indulgence, and the good life. While these popular uses often distort genuine Epicurean teachings, they have kept alive a conversation about the role of pleasure in ethics that might otherwise have been lost. Scientific and therapeutic applications. As we've seen throughout this exploration, many Epicurean insights have been validated by contemporary scientific research. The philosophy's emphasis on friendship, community, and social support has been confirmed by extensive research in social psychology and public health. Studies consistently show that people with strong social connections live longer, healthier, and happier lives than those who are socially isolated. The Epicurean understanding of pleasure and its relationship to well-being has influenced the development of positive psychology and has practical applications in various therapeutic contexts. Approaches that help people distinguish between sustainable and unsustainable sources of satisfaction, develop resilience in the face of adversity, and build meaningful relationships all draw on insights that can be traced back to Epicurean sources. The philosophy's emphasis on reducing unnecessary anxiety through correct understanding has found expression in various forms of cognitive therapy and mindfulness-based interventions. The basic Epicurean insight that much human suffering comes from false beliefs about what we need for happiness rather than from actual external circumstances has become a cornerstone of many contemporary therapeutic approaches. Social and political relevance. While Epicurean political philosophy advocated for withdrawal from conventional politics, many of its insights have relevance for contemporary social and political questions. The emphasis on creating communities based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine care for members' welfare offers an alternative model to both individualistic competition and authoritarian hierarchy. The Epicurean critique of empty desires and artificial needs provides tools for analyzing contemporary consumer culture and its impact on individual and social well-being. The philosophy's emphasis on distinguishing between natural and artificial desires can help people navigate the complex landscape of modern marketing and social pressure. The inclusive and egalitarian practices of the garden, particularly its welcome to women, slaves, and people from various social backgrounds, anticipated many contemporary discussions about diversity, equality, and social justice. While Epicurus didn't develop a systematic critique of social inequality, the logic of his philosophy pointed toward more egalitarian social arrangements. Environmental implications. The Epicurean emphasis on simple living and natural pleasures has found new relevance in contemporary discussions about environmental sustainability and climate change. The philosophy's critique of unlimited consumption and its recognition that happiness doesn't require endless accumulation of material goods provide philosophical support for more sustainable lifestyles. The Epicurean understanding of humans as part of the natural world rather than separate from or superior to it. Offers resources for developing more ecological approaches to human life and social organization. The atomic theory's recognition of the fundamental interconnectedness of all things anticipated insights about ecological interdependence that are crucial for addressing contemporary environmental challenges. Personal transformation and self-help. Perhaps the most immediate and practical legacy of Epicurean philosophy lies in its potential for personal transformation and self-improvement. The philosophy's emphasis on practical wisdom, self-examination, and the cultivation of tranquility offers tools that remain remarkably relevant for people seeking to improve their lives and relationships. The fourfold medicine provides a framework for addressing many of the anxieties and dissatisfactions that characterize modern life. By learning to distinguish between rational and irrational fears, natural and artificial desires, and sustainable and unsustainable sources of pleasure, people can make more conscious choices about how to spend their time and energy. The Epicurean emphasis on friendship and community offers an antidote to the social isolation and competitive individualism that often characterize contemporary society. By prioritizing deep, meaningful relationships and creating supportive communities, people can access one of the most reliable sources of human happiness and resilience. Educational applications. Epicurean philosophy has significant implications for education and human development. The philosophy's emphasis on learning as a lifelong process of growth and discovery, rather than the mere accumulation of facts or credentials, offers a valuable perspective on educational goals and methods. The inclusive and collaborative approach to learning that characterized the garden provides a model for educational communities that honor both individual autonomy and collective wisdom. The emphasis on practical application of knowledge and the integration of intellectual, emotional, and social development offers insights for creating more holistic educational experiences. The Epicurean understanding that wisdom cannot be simply transmitted from teacher to student, but must be actively cultivated through reflection, discussion, and practice has implications for pedagogical methods that emphasize active learning, critical thinking, and personal engagement with ideas. Interfaith and intercultural dialogue. While Epicurean philosophy emerged from ancient Greek culture and was shaped by the particular circumstances of its time, many of its insights have universal relevance that can contribute to dialogue between different religious and cultural traditions. The Epicurean emphasis on reducing suffering, promoting human flourishing, and creating communities based on mutual respect and care resonates with values found in many different traditions. The philosophy's rational and empirical approach to understanding human nature can provide common ground for people from different backgrounds to discuss fundamental questions about the good life. The Epicurean critique of superstition and fear-based approaches to religion can contribute to more mature and rational approaches to spiritual questions, while the philosophy's respect for the divine, properly understood, can bridge the gap between religious and secular perspectives. Challenges and limitations. Any honest assessment of Epicurean philosophy must also acknowledge its limitations and the challenges involved in applying ancient wisdom to contemporary circumstances. The philosophy emerged from a particular cultural context that was very different from our own, and some of its assumptions and recommendations may not translate directly to modern life. The Epicurean emphasis on withdrawal from politics, while understandable in the context of ancient Greek political instability, may not be appropriate or feasible in contemporary democratic societies where citizen participation is both a right and a responsibility. Finding ways to engage constructively in political life while maintaining philosophical integrity and personal tranquility remains a challenge for modern followers of Epicurean principles. The philosophies focus on small, intimate communities may not provide adequate guidance for addressing large-scale social problems or global challenges that require coordination across vast populations and diverse cultures. While Epicurean insights about human nature and community building remain valuable, they may need to be supplemented by other approaches to social organization and collective action. The ancient context of the garden, while revolutionary for its time, was still limited by the social and economic structures of the ancient world. Modern applications of Epicurean principles must grapple with questions about economic justice, environmental sustainability, and global interconnection that were not central concerns in Epicurus's time. The future of Epicurean philosophy. As we look toward the future, Epicurean philosophy appears likely to maintain its relevance and continue to offer insights for human flourishing. The basic human needs for friendship, meaning, tranquility, and simple pleasure that Epicurus identified are unlikely to change, even as the external circumstances of human life continue to evolve. The philosophy's emphasis on empirical observation, rational reflection, and practical application makes it well-suited to incorporating new scientific discoveries about human nature and well-being. As our understanding of psychology, neuroscience, and social behavior continues to advance, Epicurean insights can be refined and developed in new directions. The global challenges of the 21st century, including climate change, technological disruption, social inequality, and cultural conflict, require both practical wisdom and philosophical perspective. Epicurean teachings about distinguishing between essential and non-essential concerns, building resilient communities, and maintaining hope and joy in the face of uncertainty may prove particularly valuable in navigating these challenges. Perhaps most importantly, the Epicurean vision of philosophy as a practical tool for improving human life rather than an abstract academic exercise offers a model for how philosophical thinking can remain relevant and vital in an age of rapid change and increasing complexity. Conclusion: the truth of having fun. As we reach the end of our journey through the life and teachings of Epicurus, we find ourselves confronting the question posed in our title: what is the truth of having fun? The answer, as we have seen, is far more complex and profound than the popular caricature of Epicureanism would suggest. The deeper meaning of pleasure. The truth of having fun, according to Epicurus, is not about maximizing sensory gratification or avoiding all forms of discomfort and responsibility. Instead, it's about understanding the nature of genuine satisfaction and learning to distinguish between pleasures that contribute to lasting happiness and those that ultimately increase our suffering. True pleasure, in the Epicurean sense, involves the cultivation of tranquility, the development of meaningful relationships, the appreciation of simple goods that are readily available, and the wisdom to make choices that serve our long-term well-being rather than our immediate impulses. This understanding of pleasure is actually more demanding than the superficial hedonism with which Epicureanism is often confused. It requires self-knowledge, rational reflection, moral courage, and a willingness to delay gratification when necessary. It asks us to take responsibility for our own happiness while also caring genuinely for the welfare of others. The integration of wisdom and joy. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Epicurean philosophy is its insistence that wisdom and joy are not opposed to each other, but are actually complementary and mutually reinforcing. The pursuit of understanding enhances our capacity for satisfaction, while the cultivation of appropriate pleasures provides motivation and energy for continued learning and growth. This integration challenges both the puritanical idea that pleasure is inherently corrupting and the hedonistic idea that reflection and discipline are enemies of enjoyment. Instead, Epicurus offers a vision of human flourishing that honors both our capacity for rational thought and our need for satisfaction and delight. The practical implications of this integration are profound. It suggests that we need not choose between being thoughtful and being happy, between being responsible and being joyful, between caring for others and caring for ourselves. Instead, these apparent opposites can be woven together into a coherent and fulfilling way of life. The social dimension of individual happiness. Another crucial insight of Epicurean philosophy is the recognition that individual happiness is not separate from, but intimately connected to social relationships and community well-being. The truth of having fun is not a solitary truth, but a shared one that emerges through friendship, mutual support, and collective commitment to wisdom and virtue. This social dimension of happiness challenges both extreme individualism and oppressive collectivism. It suggests that we can pursue our own well-being most effectively by also working for the well-being of others, and that healthy communities are composed of individuals who are genuinely happy and fulfilled rather than frustrated or resentful. The Epicurean model of community, exemplified by the garden, offers practical insights for creating social environments that support rather than undermine individual flourishing. These include the importance of voluntary association, shared values, democratic decision-making, and the balance between individual autonomy and collective responsibility. The courage to be happy. One of the most challenging aspects of Epicurean philosophy is its implicit recognition that genuine happiness requires a certain kind of courage. This includes the courage to question conventional assumptions about what we need for satisfaction, the courage to prioritize relationships and simple pleasures over status and accumulation, and the courage to face mortality and uncertainty without losing our capacity for joy. This courage is not the heroic bravery celebrated in epic literature, but a quieter, more sustained form of wisdom that allows people to live authentically and fully despite the inevitable challenges and limitations of human existence. It requires both accepting what cannot be changed and taking responsibility for what can be influenced. The truth of having fun, in this deeper sense, is inseparable from the truth of being fully human. Acknowledging our vulnerabilities and limitations while also celebrating our capacity for growth, connection, and transcendence through wisdom and love. A philosophy for all times. As we conclude this exploration of Epicurean philosophy, we can see why its insights have remained relevant across more than 2 millennia of human history. The basic challenges that Epicurus addressed: how to be happy, how to face mortality, how to build meaningful relationships, how to distinguish between genuine and artificial needs, are perennial human concerns that take on new forms but never entirely disappear. The truth of having fun, according to Epicurus, is ultimately the truth of living wisely and well. It involves understanding ourselves and our place in the world, cultivating relationships based on mutual care and respect, appreciating the simple goods that are available to us, and approaching life's inevitable challenges with courage and perspective. This is a truth that each person must discover and apply for themselves. But it is also a truth that is best explored and practiced in community with others who share the commitment to wisdom and human flourishing. The garden that Epicurus created in ancient Athens continues to exist wherever people gather to support each other in the pursuit of genuine happiness and the art of living well. Final reflections. The life and teachings of Epicurus remind us that philosophy at its best is not an abstract intellectual exercise, but a practical guide for living more fully and joyfully. The questions he asked and the answers he proposed remain as relevant today as they were in ancient Greece. What do we really need to be happy? How can we reduce unnecessary suffering? What kinds of relationships and communities support human flourishing? How can we face uncertainty and mortality with courage and grace? These are not easy questions, and Epicurean philosophy does not offer easy answers. Instead, it provides tools for thinking carefully about these fundamental concerns and examples of how such thinking can be translated into actual ways of life. The truth of having fun, as Epicurus understood it, is inseparable from the truth of being human in the fullest sense: rational and emotional, individual and social, mortal and transcendent. By embracing this complex truth and learning to live in accordance with it, we can discover forms of satisfaction and joy that are both deeply personal and genuinely shared, both naturally grounded and spiritually uplifting. As we close this exploration, we are reminded that the most fitting tribute to Epicurus is not merely to understand his teachings, but to apply them in our own lives, to test them against our own experience, and to share what we learn with others who are also seeking to live wisely and well. In this way, the garden continues to flourish, and the pursuit of genuine happiness remains a living tradition rather than merely a historical curiosity. The truth of having fun, ultimately, is the truth of human flourishing in all its complexity and possibility. It is a truth that Epicurus glimpsed and shared, but it is also a truth that each generation must discover and embody anew. May this exploration of his life and teachings contribute to that ongoing discovery and help readers find their own paths to wisdom, friendship, and joy. Closing. And so we come to the end of our comprehensive journey through the life, philosophy, and enduring legacy of Epicurus. We have explored how a young man from the island of Samos developed one of history's most profound and misunderstood philosophies of human happiness and flourishing. We have seen how Epicurus created not just a system of ideas, but a way of life embodied in the garden that demonstrated how philosophical principles could be lived rather than merely discussed. We have examined the fourfold medicine and discovered how ancient wisdom about pleasure, pain, mortality, and the divine remains remarkably relevant for contemporary life. We have traced the influence of Epicurean thought through history, from the Roman Empire to the Renaissance to our own time, and we have seen how modern science has validated many of Epicurus's insights about human nature and well-being. Most importantly, we have discovered that the truth of having fun, genuine pleasure, and lasting happiness is far more sophisticated and demanding than popular stereotypes suggest. It requires wisdom, courage, friendship, and the integration of individual fulfillment with social responsibility. The legacy of Epicurus continues to challenge and inspire us to think more carefully about what we truly need for happiness, how we can build meaningful communities, and how we can face life's inevitable challenges with grace and resilience. Thank you for joining me on this philosophical journey. May the insights we have explored together contribute to your own pursuit of wisdom, friendship, and the art of living well. As Epicurus taught his followers, true philosophy is not just about understanding the world, but about transforming our lives and helping others do the same. Until we meet again in another exploration of human wisdom and possibility, I wish you the courage to question, the wisdom to choose well, and the joy that comes from living authentically and fully. This has been Epicurus Biography, the truth of having fun. Thank you for listening.